Hi, welcome back. So in this video, we are going to continue with our intermediate CSS. In the last one, we learned how to select some specific areas using the div, span, the class, and the ID, right? And now in this video, we are going to focus on two things. The first is specificity, and the next is special selectors. So first, let's see what specificity means, right? So specificity is basically a concept that you will use to determine the style that your element will get if you have applied multiple styles of the same property to it by different elements. That's a lot of words. Let me explain it through an example. So what I mean is that imagine this h2 was not in this div, but this was in another div called id is equal to first, right? And then I'll move all of this up here. So now this is the structure I have. I have a div of id is equal to first, then I have an h2, then I have an id is equal to green, right? So what specificity here would do is that first, if we style all the divs and give them a color of pink, and I'll just comment all of this out except border one. If I go to my page right now, and I refresh, I see everything is pink because everything is inside of a div, and I've given a div of color is equal to pink. However, if I uncomment this, I'll just remove this from here and I'll put this here. So now the green class is uncommented, right? The green ID is uncommented, and hence we are targeting this div and we are telling that the color should be green. However, with this style, we are telling that the color should be pink for a div, and this is both a div and has ID is equal to green. So both of these styles are affecting this single element right here. So what do you think will happen? Will it get a color of green or will it get a color of pink? Let's see. It gets green. Now why is that? That is because first we have put color is equal to green later, right? And in the previous video I told you that if I'm putting something later, then that will be considered first. However, even if I move this up and I refresh, I see it's still green. So why is that? That is because the green ID is more specific than the div. Div can be targeting a lot of things on the page. However, the green ID will target only a small amount of things, only one thing on the whole page, not even a small amount, right? Because ID is unique. Or if I had a class, say I was doing this .abcd, and I'll move this up to, and I refresh, I see the ABCD styles are applied to both of these. These were the two divs having the class of ABCD, and they got colors equal to red rather than pink, even though we were setting pink later. That is again because class is more specific than a div. We are targeting a less amount of elements, and you don't actually have to count the number of elements. It's quite evident that a class or an ID would be more specific than just giving a style to a particular tag, right? And same would apply if we were not just using IDs. If here we are doing div color is equal to pink, and then if we do p, and I'll remove this green class, I'll comment this out, ID, sorry. If I do a p of color, and I'll do red here too. So what will happen right now? We see this turns red. Again, you might say that this is because this comes later, but I refresh and I see that it still remains red even if I move this up, and that is because we can see that the paragraph is inside the div, right? And hence it is more specific. Selecting an element inside the div is evidently more specific than selecting the div itself. I'm selecting the paragraph specifically inside the div, and hence that is more specific than just selecting this whole div, even if it had 20 elements inside of it, right? And that is why this is given a preference. So that is what specificity is. That's all it is, and most of the times you'll just have to use your common intuition to actually determine which is more specific and which is not, and you'll be able to actually do it. That's not a big problem. So the next thing that we're going to study, which is the main point of this whole lecture, is special selectors. Now we have learned a lot of things, and we have learned how to apply styles through a div, through an ID, through a class, or through a span. We haven't used a span in this particular code right now, but there might be some conditions when you would want to style only some particular elements, and you could obviously apply a class to them, but if you have 20 such combinations, applying 20 classes is never a good solution, right? So to give you a better demonstration of what I'm talking about here, let's consider that this div is not present, or rather let's keep it there, and I'll just add a div after this. I'll add a paragraph after this saying I am the new paragraph. I refresh. I see I have a new paragraph here, and that is because it's getting a color red because of this small thing right here. And if I reverse that, I get my green back here and I get a black here, right? So now let's start with the selectors. So the first thing is adjacent selector. So imagine that I wanted to select only the paragraphs that are coming after a div, or let's say I have an h2 here saying this is a new topic, and according to some requirement on my website, I need to put a background on all the paragraphs that directly follow an h2. I mean directly follow, not this paragraph, even though it is after an h2, but first of all it's indented inwards, and second there's a div in between, right? So I want to target the paragraphs that are directly after an h2, and you might do that for various reasons. You'll see this a lot, and you'll not be able to understand its use right now, and because it's not quite easy to give an example for the same, but you can just remember this, or you can just know that okay, something like this exists, and when in the future you run into a problem where you have to do something like this, you can come back to this video and you can see how we did this, right? So for the adjacent, we'll do something like h2, we put a plus in between, and then we put a p. So now this selector will select all the paragraphs that are coming after an h2, and then we'll do a background color of steel blue. I have not put my semicolon there, right? And if I refresh, I see I got a steel blue background here, right? And that is because I selected h2 plus p. You can see all of these did not get any background, and that is because they do not directly follow. A given h2 on the page. They might follow an h2, but not directly, not as a sibling on the same indentation level, right? And that is where indentation is helpful again. See, to determine the level of an element on the page. So this is the adjacent selector. However, imagine we wanted to select only the paragraphs that are inside of a div. We do not want to select this one. So how will we do that? And I'll remove this style from now. Command / right? So now I have refreshed this. See, I don't have any background on any of them. Now I want to apply the background to only the paragraphs that are inside of a div, right? Inside, not directly, even if they're inside of a div and then inside of a span and then a paragraph, but they are inside of a div, right? So that we would do with a descendant selector. So how the descendant selector works is you can just simply do div p, and then you can do background color. Let's take some really new color here. I'll take corn silk, right? And if I refresh, I see I get a corn silk background on these paragraphs, but I do not get it in this one. And the reason behind that is all of these paragraphs are inside a div. And this one, the new paragraph, is not inside any div. It is a standalone paragraph, right? And that is why the div space p does not apply to this paragraph here. And that is how you use a descendant selector, by putting the parent space and then the child, right? And this is not just a two-level thing. You could do something like body, and this is obviously not, really logical, because obviously a div will be inside of body. But imagine you wanted to select all anchor tags inside of a list item inside of a UL, right? So this would be perfectly normal, because you are doing a UL space li space a. That is how you could do it. That's never a problem, right? So this is how the descendant selector works. And the last thing I wanted to show you in this was the attribute selector. For that, we can just add I think 4 A tags here, right? So I'll do an A tag with hrefs https, and this will say Google. I'll duplicate this. I'll make this Wikipedia, and I'll make this wikipedia.org, right? And I'll duplicate this whole thing again. Okay, so now if I refresh, I see I have 4 links right here, and I'll just wrap this in a div. So you see, normally up until now, to get this into separate lines, we were using breaks, right? BR tags. But now I'm going to use a lot of divs, and this is the proper way to do it. Using divs is how you would do it in industry, right? And that is why you had so many divs on the page, on the Facebook page, if you remember, because that is how, because div is actually really helpful in segmenting your code into parts and then referencing to it whenever you need to. So there's one div left. And now if I refresh, I see I have my 4 links on different pages on different lines, right? So now let's say I want to target only those A tags for some styling that have href of google.com. Now remember, href is an attribute, right? So that is why this is known as the attribute selector, because we are targeting a tag on the basis of its attribute. So let's say I want to target only the A tags that have href of Google. So how I will do is I'll write A, I'll put square braces here, and inside I can put any attribute that I want to compare. So I'll do href https So now with this, I've selected all the A tags that have an href of this, right? You put an equal to here, and now if I do a background color again, and I'll find another different color, dark slate gray, let's say, right? Now if I refresh, I see these 2 links with Google have become dark slate gray in the background. And similarly, if I want to do something like https this is right? And I'll do this. I can do, let's change the color this time and I'll do it black. You can see currently it's purple, some kind of purple, and now it turns black. That was a pretty small change. Let's make this white, and you can see on white this will disappear. So it does disappear, but you can see it's working still. So that's what an attribute selector is. So now we've seen three types of selectors, and I'm highlighting all those three here. Now this is the adjacent selector, and in this particular example, you will see by example that we are selecting all the paragraphs following an H2, right? So this is your specific adjacent selector. This is the descendant selector. How this works is it is selecting all the paragraphs inside of a div, right? This is the attribute selector. It is selecting all the A tags with href is equal to google.com, and you can see what it's selecting up here, right? VS Code shows us this really nice thing up here, and hence here you can see it's showing us div, some lines, and then P. And similarly for this, right? So these are the type of selectors that we have, and I mean these are the types that you will see the most. Now there are around 30 ways of selecting, 30 important ways of selecting things in CSS. So obviously I cannot cover 30 ways in these videos. What I'll do is I'll give you a link of an article in the description. You can go to that and you can refer to that whenever you need to, right? Because you might need to have some different kind of selector later, and then you can go to that article and refer to it, or you can go to any article and refer to it, because CSS is actually standard, right, for the whole world, so it's not a problem. So, and one last thing, that they have a specificity which is higher than normal element selection, of course, because we are selecting quite specific range of elements, right? And you could also have something like hash first. So it's not that this would work for only elements. You could have a class name or an ID name anywhere here, right? That is never a problem. And if I refresh, I see this becomes more specific, and it selects only this, which has an ID equal to first on the div and then a paragraph inside, right? So that is how this works, and that is all you need to know for the most used selectors. And you can go to the link in the description to read about more, and it'll say that you need to memorize all those, but that's not actually the case. You can refer back to it whenever you need to, and eventually you will get to remember the most useful ones, right? So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.